Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is Chris Orozco, and I have a very special guest for you today, a very good friend, Elizabeth Grace. And she is I always get this wrong, so I made sure that I looked it up yesterday. Sex and embodiment coach. No, empowerment coach. That's the one.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. I noticed that I kept getting it wrong, so I wanted to make sure I got it right. And today we're going to be talking about integrating the shadow of sexuality. We're going to talk about what type of stuff would live in your shadow. We're going to talk about how to integrate it, what integrating it would look like, and essentially just give you a roadmap of what the fuck all this looks like. So, Elizabeth, can you tell me a little bit about your work and what you do so we can get an idea of who you are?
Yeah, so I work doing sexuality and intimacy coaching here in New Zealand. I mainly work with individuals who are transitioning or transforming what their sexuality or what their relationships look like with themselves or with others. So we explore the depths of themselves, the healing and integration of the bullshit trauma that they've been carrying, and then empowering them to step up into the lives, the relationships, and have the sex that they want.
God, I love that. Okay, great. So that actually, that intro was perfect because it ties directly into the questions that I have for you. And so the first thing I want to know is, what are some of the stories that you come up against? Like the things that people don't have integrated in their experience. What are some of the most common things that show up?
That's a really good question. Common themes is usually detachment from themselves. That there is an aspect of themselves that they don't connect with, that works against them, as we're speaking about the shadowy side. I know for me personally, I had wounded around love and the receival of love and needing to be loved. And so my shadow within sexuality was to use my sexuality, my energy in a manipulative way to control relationships and get what I wanted. So that's themes that have come up for people. There's a disconnection from themselves or their core needs, wants, desires within life, or around their ability to communicate their needs and wants in a healthy way.
That's so big. I feel like so many people struggle with being able to communicate their needs. I mean, sexuality in particular, because it's so vulnerable, but just in general, like what the fuck you want to eat for dinner is very difficult for people to talk about, let alone their sexuality.
Yeah.
So I really love what you said from your own personal experience of having to integrate the communication because you were noticing yourself being passive aggressive and all those different types of things. Would you mind actually telling me a little bit more about that? Because something that I'm trying to learn about right now is because, obviously I know plenty about the male shadow and sexuality. That's like, or the masculine shadow. That's the being overly aggressive as opposed to passive aggressive. Like that's what I'm aware of. And something that I've been really curious about is the feminine shadow. So if you could tell me a little bit more about that, I'd be super curious.
From my personal experience, it was around the manipulation. I've always been really aware of my sexual energy, my ability to attract that which I want, and my ability to coerce or control people using that. So the need of it did come down to my need for control, but also my need for love. We all want to experience love. We all want to be loved. And I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to receive love. And so I controlled my relationships using my sexuality.
Got it. So that makes perfect sense. And that in the roles of masculinity and femininity, that does make perfect sense. It's like, okay, I'm not going to win by sheer force. I can't overpower you and make you do what I want to do. I can't scare you into doing what I want you to do. So I need to find what areas I do have power and control and wield those as best I can.
Absolutely.
And that's, to be honest, when you're dealing with men, that's a pretty damn good strategy.
It worked well for me.
Yeah, because for the most part, if you know how to turn a guy on, then it's, for the most part, the vast majority of guys are pretty much going to do whatever the hell you want. As long as you can wield that power, you really do have a lot of control. And so I think it's important to point out that that is actually a valid strategy and that it will work.
It is, absolutely. The thing that I had with that was at that point of my life where I was using that energy in a manipulative way. I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea of what my core needs were. And
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea of, as far as need fulfillment goes within relationships. Yes, I now had the ability to control who I was with.
Mm-hmm.
But in as far as getting what I needed from that relationship, I wasn't receiving at all
Mm.
the love, and I myself didn't have the ability to receive that love because I didn't know how I needed to get it. So in as much as the manipulation was there, and it's, you know, a useful, the lighter side of that is influence. So
Mm-hmm.
when we can use our sexuality or our sexual energy to influence in alignment with our core needs, it's beautiful. It's not shadowy at all, and that's the key thing, I guess, around the integration of that experience for myself. It's now I do know what my core needs are. I do know how to get those met for myself, and then also when relating with others, that which I desire in my life, that which I want from other people, I can use my sexual energy to influence in receiving that in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I like pointing out how well the unconscious shit works, because I like to give people credit, because it's like we wouldn't do it if it didn't work. And I
No.
think and it's easier to forgive yourself if you understand that it's a viable survival strategy. But I really like what you said about transforming it, and specifically what transforming this particular thing looks like, because I'd never actually considered that before. That instead of the manipulative, passive aggressive type of way, you can actually use it as kind of an invitation.
Mm.
Because what I know now that I, for the most part, can't really be manipulated by sex anymore. Like I've been on my own long enough to where I'm pretty much stable in that.
Mhm.
But I do notice that there are different kinds of women that I feel invited to be a better version of myself. And it's because of the way that they embody themselves.
Mm.
It's not like oh, I need to own and control this thing in order to be safe. It's like, holy shit, look at that. Like, look at how much better life could be. Look at how much, and then you feel the dissonance between where you're at now and where you would need to be in order to meet that woman there.
Yeah.
And that is so much more inspiring.
Yes, it's so fucking delicious, isn't it? It's one of my favorite things. I have a really bad habit of evolving myself really quickly, and so I relate to these people, relate to other people who are inspiring, and then that growth happens, and I match them, and then there's that next evolution, and meeting those new people, or even with people that I have been with, and watching them evolve
Mm-hmm.
and expand who they are. That evolution of self is one of the most delicious things I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Growing in partnership with people, but then also meeting people outside of the relationship, not necessarily to begin a relationship with
Sure.
them, but just to observe and be inspired and see, as you see, what else is possible.
Yeah, I like what you said there, because because in this main distinction that we're talking about, as before I had this realization, I used to feel this way and used to think that it meant that, like, I either had to have sex with her, or she needed to be my girlfriend, or I needed to have some kind of crazy romantic experience with her, and I thought that, like, that's what I needed to do. But now I'm
Mm.
like, no, I'm the thing I'm really craving is the ability to be present with someone that I see this way.
Yeah.
That if I can clear out all the things that get in the way of me being present with this person, then I'm who I want to be. And it's not, and you saying that it's not necessarily about starting a relationship or anything like that, was really big for me to understand, because it could just be inspiration. It could be someone who makes you feel like you want to be better.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious for you, what was the biggest obstacle that you needed to integrate in order to be able to stand up for your boundaries and your values and your desires and all those different things?
The biggest obstacle was the disconnection and disassociation I had with myself. So I went through a period 5-6 years ago where I was experiencing depression. A multitude of things. Most of my young adult life, I've been very disconnected from myself. Most women could probably relate to this, and maybe some men too, where we pretend to be other people, where our certain social situations or relationships, we put on a mask and we say, well, to be loved or to be accepted, we need to be a certain way, which is what almost everyone experiences, I think, at some point. And so I had moved through a lot of my earlier years living this way, and it culminated in the experience of depression and moving through that process, becoming aware of how disconnected I was from myself and rebuilding that.
So it was like a matter of, you couldn't stand up for values or desires or anything like that because you couldn't even hear them.
I couldn't identify them at all. No, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I stood for. I didn't know my values. I didn't know what was important within my life. And as far as love and relationships and sexuality, I did anything the other person wanted so that I was loved. So yeah, recreating my life, moving through that period, recreating my life and reconnecting with myself was my biggest thing. Understanding what my core was. I now have what I call my core 4, which is how I create my life and what I need for my fulfillment, which is a life that is full of joy, love, passion, and pleasure. And it's something I go on about all the time.
So having those joy, love, passion, pleasure.
My core 4, if what I'm experiencing in my life, communicating with people, work that I'm doing, if it doesn't at least have 3 of those elements, it can get fucked. I'm not going to engage, or I'll excuse myself in a very polite way, because we all have our energy. Like for me, my energy is priority, and where I invest my energy, if I'm not being fulfilled, well, why am I there?
Yeah, why just dump into an empty thing that's not giving back? That's very unsatisfying. So I want to make sure I remember these. Can you say them again, the 4?
So my core 4 are joy, love, passion, and pleasure.
Joy, love, passion, and pleasure. Yeah, that pretty much covers it.
They're pretty good. I've had another friend, I think he said happiness. Happiness, love, trust, and confidence. Those were his 4. If he can experience life in that way, confidently, with trust, love, and happiness. So those were his keywords for him.
That's cool. I want to think of mine. I know fun is in there somewhere. Passion is in there. Truth/authenticity. And purpose, I would say, are probably mine.
Yes. Yeah. I think it really helps bring clarity to the life that we choose to live.
Yeah, especially if it's 4, it gives you very clear parameters. Especially if you choose those parameters, you're like, okay, these are my standards. Like, nobody told me to live this way. Like, I'm not reading this from some spiritual book or something. Like, this is what I want. Is this giving me what I want? No. Am I the type of person to do things other than what I want? Like, that's very, very clear.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. And those are really big things, as you said. You're making that distinction, that choice for yourself. That is a massive part of the work that I do with people. I don't want to tell people how to live. I want my clients, I want the people who I'm working with to really identify what is important for them.
And so I'm curious, because I think this experience of dissociation is common across the gender spectrum. Because I'm realizing now, after being single for, a year now, I'm realizing that that's a huge element of what I'm experiencing. And I'm having to relax into figuring out what I actually want and integrating all these different things. And it's way different than I thought. Like, I thought I was fully satisfied just like having aggressive sex that lasted for a while. Like, I was knocking off my little like cultural things. It's like, yeah, she's tired when it's done. like, yeah, you hit all your marks, bro. Nicely done.
Mm-hmm.
But I started to realize that it stopped being fun. Like at a certain point, hitting all the marks is pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had to start feeling into my experience, I noticed that dissociation was huge and that there was a lot of stuff I didn't understand. I craved things that I saw outside, but that's where it ended. I didn't feel where it connected to me. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what would be, if anybody is watching this and they're feeling dissociated themselves, like what would be a good way to start sifting through and identifying some of your desires or maybe your boundaries or things like that?
Dare I say it, but put yourself in situations that you have to explore those in safe ways, of course.
Sure. So what would that look like?
So for me, I like speaking with sexuality in particular. So I engage with people on a broad spectrum of experiences in a way that was clearly communicated, that I was exploring boundaries. So I've gone through the whole subdom. I've gone through the different aspects of different kinks, different explorations, but also fundamentally spending a fuckload of time with myself and my own experience of sexuality, sexual pleasure, arousal, different the self-exploration as far as what I like for myself, I think is a very core thing that people need to do before they engage with others. Because we're always, as much as we don't want to be, I feel we're always going to be influenced by others, external environments. And so taking that time for ourselves and becoming aware of our likes and dislikes, where our boundaries are, and our ability to communicate them. So one of the practices that I've done through my training and do with clients is encouraging the spoken expression of what they're experiencing and what they're enjoying. Or that which they're not enjoying. So if they're self-pleasuring in a certain way, trying a certain things, allowing the sensation to be there within their body, but then also vocalizing it. So there's almost a cognitive understanding of their experience.
Wow. Yeah, you really wrap that concept with a nice little bow at the end, like a verbal conceptual understanding of their experience. I think that would do a lot for people. Because like you said, it's the dissociation is so to the point for a lot of people that a lot of times they don't, like I've dated women that didn't know when they were feeling good and didn't know when they weren't feeling good. And a lot of times like they reflect on the experience afterwards and think like, oh, wait a minute, there's like, okay, so I liked that and didn't like that. But in the moment, they aren't really fully aware of what they're liking and not liking. And so I think being aware enough to put a label on it and then accurately speak that label, I think is a very, very powerful way to cut through all that crap.
It was something that I also did, I did specifically with sexuality, with sex, but also with emotions. But in the recreation of my life, moving through depression, being deeply disconnected from my emotions and relearning those and putting myself in situations that I perceived I would experience, like real basic things, joy, sadness, like really clear cutthroat. You're either going to like it or you're not. Allowing the experience of it and being like, okay, this is how I'm experiencing joy. What am I feeling? And really associating that. And then as I had that polarity, working with slightly more defined emotions, to gain that difference of those elements and being able to understand cognitively what I perceive them to be, but then also through the sensations in my body. So becoming aware of those and being able to communicate those with myself and with others as well has been hugely beneficial within relationships and sex.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I know for me that one of the biggest turnoffs is someone who can't communicate their desires and makes it entirely up to me to guess and then doesn't communicate what they don't like either. And then if it goes great, then like, whoop-de-doo, I'm like super lover, good for me. But if it doesn't, then like I'm bad, and then they're unsatisfied, and I fucking hate that. And so to make it that simple is just verbalize in the most simple terms possible. And I love what you said about it being cutthroat. If you're going to know immediately whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
I think that's so important because when I get my clients to try to verbalize their emotions, a lot of times it comes through this cerebral, highly intellectualized thing that it's like, Jesus Christ. No, that's something somebody writing an essay would say, not like something someone experiencing an emotion would say. Like we need to cut through the crap and make it raw so that you can actually communicate what needs to be communicated. And that alone, I think, will make people face the fear of whether it's rejection or abandonment or whatever it is. That process alone, I think, is the simplicity almost makes it deceiving. It's almost deceivingly powerful with how simplistic it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that everyone should know about, well, I guess me, is that simplicity is the way to go. If I can make things easy, perfect. Stop fucking around.
I love the way you said that. Okay, great. So now I want to shift topics a little bit because you said something I want to get into. Okay. Let's talk about kinks.
Wow.
Yeah. So how do you discover which ones you personally want to explore? If someone were to be, because I've dated women where I would try to figure out what theirs were, and they would be so disconnected from their experience. They'd be like, I don't know, I can't think of anything. I don't know. And so we'd like try stuff just for the sake of trying stuff, and that's cool for its own sake. But what would you say to somebody who's wanting to tune in to figure out what might excite them and what they might want to experience?
So just like you would do with food, like try it.
So just like whatever pops up first in your head, like you're walking through the grocery store, apple, that sounds good.
A big thing for me was connecting with my own inner guidance. So just as that real clear difference of good, bad, having that connection within myself. So I had an experience with a client recently, reconnecting her with her inner guidance, where whenever something felt right to her, she got goosebumps. Like whenever it was true and real, she could really viscerally feel it within her body, and her skin would pop up in goosebumps. It's nice. Fucking delicious.
Yeah.
And so when she was relating with people or choosing activities, if she didn't have that experience, she would stay away from it. So being able to determine what your attraction is, what is true for you, your yes and no internally, I feel is really important. But then also just the exploration of other things, understanding maybe too what could be underneath it, not to get too deep, but the awareness of why you're guided or inspired by certain activities. I did see a question that came through to you about being fucked like a whore, and then also being loved in a gentle way. The desire to be taken, where does that come from? Like what is at the core of that? I know for me personally, I'm not sure if we've spoken about this, but I have shared in the past that my desire to be taken in that way is that full surrender, to just give in and experience. It's not to be beaten the shit out of. It's the safety and the support and the trust that I can have in another person to be able to hold me in that surrender. And that's what my core desire in that is.
Nice. And so I'm curious because that's what I hear a lot from women that enjoy that type of interaction. And another question I got is, there are some women that do just like to be treated fucking like either rape fantasies or degradation or anything like that. I have some friends that do things like that. And to me, it seems perfectly healthy. But I'm curious, or I'm not curious. I mean, I am, but this person who wrote in had the question of where does that come from? Like the idea or the desire to be degraded or rape fantasies or things that seem a little less wholesome, because it's one thing to just be like Clark Gable style fucking just like ravished like a gentleman on fire or some shit like that. But it's another thing to just get really gross with it. And I like both. And so my friend who wrote in wanted to know where that drive comes from, because he understands it from the male perspective. He understands why he would want to treat someone like that, but he doesn't understand why someone would want to be treated that way.
It makes me question around self-worth and worthiness issues. How that woman feels about herself, if she feels that to receive love, to receive the nourishment in the way that feels right for her, maybe there could be conditioning around her receival of love only being in ways where she's made to feel like shit. And if that is her conditioned patterning around receival, then that is what it is. There could also be too I've met a lot of professional men, high power men, who like to go into situations where they are treated like shit, and it is just to experience the polarity of not having to be in power, not having to be well presented and in charge. They like that contrast. That polarity is important to them for their own nourishment. So I would be questioning the mindset of the people that you're engaging.
Which I think is great, because that brings me to something else. Is I notice in my own self that if I find myself attracted to something, that some other part of me would be like, bro, I don't think that's fully healthy. I don't think that's a great idea to pursue that. I'll pursue it in safe ways, maybe in my own mind or through conversation or whatever. And a lot of times I'll find something missing in myself. And once I integrate it, I don't actually want that thing anymore.
Yes.
And so I think that's a very valuable element of this conversation, because I don't think that gets talked about a lot. I only have one friend that talks about the integration element of it. And because a lot of people are like, don't kink shame me, bro. Like, whatever you want is whatever you want. And I can do these things that may be potentially damaging my psyche if I fucking feel like it. And you can't say nothing about it. And I think by a large degree, that is how a lot of people think, or at least that's what I come in contact with fairly frequently. And I don't think that's right, because I think there are ways to go about exploring these kind of darker, shadowy elements of ourselves in ways that can bring it to the light, so you can decide if this is a behavior you genuinely want to continue, or if you can say, oh, wow, this is actually hurting me in ways I didn't understand, and it's because I'm missing an important element of my personality. And then you integrate that element of your personality, and suddenly the desire goes away. I've experienced that recently. And so what do you think about that? About the ability to either drive something deeper with kinky behavior or heal it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I would say the intent and motivation and awareness around the interaction is where I would say, are you engaging in that behavior to not deal with things that are going on? Are you repressing shadowy parts that do need to be integrated, or are you doing it in a really mindful way and allowing the exploration of them? I mean, we all know that when we repress things, they kind of punch back at some point in our lives, but when we do offer space and hold them and accept them and welcome them to be expressed in safe and healthy ways, as you said, the motivation, the inspiration to engage in them does lessen and sometimes completely go away.
Yeah, and I think I like what you said, because I think that's where, like with men at least, one of the common stigmas with porn is that if you watch enough porn, then eventually you'll only be able to get off to really gross shit, and you'll feel super bad about yourself. That's never happened to me, thank God. But I think it does come from this repression of the shadowy stuff. It's like you're into one fringe thing, and you don't explore it. You don't bring it to the surface. You don't figure out why you're into that weird fringy thing. Yeah. And then you shame yourself for it, and it drives that pattern deeper and deeper. And next thing you know, it's like the shame is bigger. And so you're attracted to fringier and weirder shit. And then it's this cycle. And next thing you know, all you can get off to is just really disgusting stuff. And so, disgusting by, whatever subjective definition you want to give.
Yeah.
But I think that distinction is really important for both men and women, because a lot of times we're not taught to embrace those things. Like sure, maybe the archetype of the player for guys at some point was a valid archetype, but
Mm-hmm.
those guys don't actually get as much uh, social credit as we're led to believe they do. That living that way actually sucks. And with women, it's like, the stigma of being a slut. And so there's all these different things that make it difficult for us to examine our sexuality and make it difficult for us to be honest about it. And especially because, at least here in America, and it may or may not be the same in New Zealand, but highly Christian influence. And so if you do have anything potentially shameful in you, it's like, you don't fucking talk about that. And I think that's really, really damaging, that a lot of people are just having to try to navigate this stuff on their own. And it doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm. Anything that represses the expression of self in any way, sexual, emotional, intellectual, creatively, is really fucking damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I There is so much to experience in life, and there is so much to explore. When you're repressing things, you're repressing your ability to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just don't think many people have ever had someone either look them in the eyes or have a real heart-to-heart conversation with them and say that, hey, that like shameful thing that you want, it's okay to want it.
Yes.
Like, nobody told me that until I was 24, and I didn't get it until I was like 30.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes such a huge difference. And to not only, especially to know that just because you want this thing, that it's okay to accept that you want it and love it, but not have to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all these different nuanced things about emotional intelligence in general, let alone sexual emotional intelligence, are just, conversations aren't fucking happening. And so let's see, what else would be a good thing to go into? Because we talked about kinks, about how to identify healthy ones, how to do all that. We talked about what
There's also, I want to acknowledge um, the change. So we experience something, we enjoy it, and then we don't.
mm,
Just as if we ate the same food every day, at some point we're going to be like, I'm fucking sick of this.
yeah.
Just because you've enjoyed something for a certain period of your life, it doesn't mean you have to always enjoy it. You can
Mm,
stop, you can change. Just as with relationships, if a relationship is no longer enjoyable, no longer pleasing, and you don't want to work on it, you do have the choice to stop. You do have the choice to get out. So with regards to kink and sex and sexuality, the communication within partnership of what you enjoy changes.
mm-hmm.
So having that space in which you can communicate those fluctuations in your pleasure is I
That's
think really important.
a brilliant, and I think I'm trying to think back, because that sounds familiar to me. It sounds viscerally familiar to me,
Mm-hmm.
that experience causes a certain kind of existential terror when you're like, oh shit, I don't like this thing that I used to like anymore, and like I know my partner likes it, and like what if I stop doing this thing? It's another one of those things where, yeah, no one tells you that it's okay to change. No one tells you that it's okay to not like different, or to not like the thing you liked yesterday.
Yes.
And that, oh, so here's a good one. Uh, letting down your partner. How can people be okay with letting down their partners, especially with sex? Because I don't know how common this is, but sex can feel like the end all be all, where, especially because I don't know what the female version of this is, but as a man, as a kid, I was indoctrinated to think that, like, if you don't fuck her right, somebody will.
Mm.
And you better do it right, and you better do it often, or else some other guy will.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that I got is like, fuck, I gotta like do all the things right or I'm screwed, and I can't have
Performance
preferences.
anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. I can't have preferences. I can't go counter to what she wants, because she will cheat on me if she's not satisfied. And I'd actually would first love to hear what the inverse of that. Like, were you indoctrinated to think some similar but opposing version of that? I'm sure you were.
So it's really funny that you say you have to perform how your lover wants it, because that is exactly how I've been I've been taught as well. And I remember speaking about this just on a Facebook ramble, how we're all doing the things we think we want our partners. So the thing we think that our partners want.
Yep. All the time.
All the time. Whereas if we identified within ourselves what we want and then could communicate that with our partner, and our partner do the same, we could be like, okay, you want these things, I want these things, let's see if they match or where the happy medium is. And we'd all be having the sex we wanted, we'd all be in the relationships we wanted, we'd all be living in a way that really fulfilled us.
Yep.
It all comes down to, I think, clarity and understanding of our core needs, wants, desires, and then the transparent communication of that.
Yes, especially like the listening piece, because I know for me, I remember in my last relationship that not only was I trying to live up to what she wanted, I was living up to an ideal that I made up of what she wanted, because I didn't know. I would ask and I wouldn't get answers. And so I would just like, I'd sit there and I'd be like, yeah, I think I can assume. I think I can guess. That seems like a fair game. And then I would try and live up to my own projected version of what I thought she wanted, which turns out was actually not what she wanted.
Yeah.
And it's crazy easy to do that. And so something that's coming up for me right now is, it seems like a deal breaker is someone who can't communicate those type of things, because how on earth are you ever going to meet in the middle if one person doesn't even know what their middle looks like?
Yeah, it's really funny that you say that. So I've recently jumped on Tinder. Don't use it a hell of a lot, but I work for myself, I work alone, I work in a small town, and so meeting people is kind of difficult. So
I can imagine fucking unsuspecting guys coming across you and
poor bastards. But the core thing that almost every single one of them says to me is how I communicate. Like, I'm direct, I'm clear, and it's one thing that if I scroll through my messages right now, it would be a consistent theme from everyone that has messaged me.
Oh, I bet.
The amount of communication, the clarity, the transparency. There's no fucking around. And when that clarity of communication there, as you said, you're not creating yourself to be what you think, what you perceive someone else wants you to be. It's transparent. It's right there. They've been like, this is what I want. This is what I need. Can you match that? Can you be that or not? Simple.
And that is like, just hearing that is so refreshing to me, because I know, and in my experience of dating, is that's the one thing that's missing the most is communication. It's like, I don't really necessarily care if anybody likes me or not, but what I care about is whether or not they tell me. Like, if I don't know until a week later and I'm like, oh fuck, like I probably shit. And because there's so many things it leaves open loops, and just poor communication is just so rare. And just hearing you talk about it, I'm like feeling this really deep sense of relief. And that really is something that stands out, is the ability to communicate. And I make jokes about it on my page and shit all the time, but that is the number one thing. And so I'm curious for you, since you lead with really good communication, what's your way of vetting out whether or not somebody is communicating well just because you do, or because it's an actual value of theirs? Because that's something I worry about.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I freak out about it.
And so I'll counter back with, if they're communicating clearly, what the fuck does it matter?
Because when shit hits the fan, they won't.
I think if you're relating with someone that long, you would have worked out if it is a core thing or not.
Yeah, but I just want to know how to identify that, because I don't have, for a lot of things, I have my checklist of like, okay, but I'm like, nope, get the fuck out.
They match.
Yeah, exactly. But for communication, especially because when you're the one who leads, a lot of time it's easy for people to relax in the presence of someone who leads. But what you don't know is that because they're showing up in a certain way because you make it easy for them, what you don't know is they're actually hiding a whole bunch of other shit because they don't
ask them really hard questions. Like go deep and go core. Like, I remember one of my past connections, we just dive straight into all of the depths All of the nasty stuff, all of the things that were like, what are things you don't want me to know about you? And just ask like real straight up hard questions.
That's a good ass question. I don't know how I
Well,
would
it's
answer
like
that.
it's not like that can trigger some big shit like, oh my God. Um, but yeah, I think the challenging people will really in that respect show those true colors of how they do communicate.
I love that. Can you give me some more examples of some hard questions that you would ask? You don't have to answer them. I just want to know what they would be because that was pretty good.
Um, oh, you've put me on the spot. I can't think of anything, but I will message you if I
Okay, yeah,
um
and I'll make a little PDF and I'll share it. It'll be like questions for when you fucking meet people on Tinder. I
yeah.
hate Tinder. I haven't. God damn, do I hate it. It might be different in LA because everybody on Tinder in LA is just they're just trying to get you to like their Instagram page. They're all models and
I
shit.
I've had people say that about here in New Zealand too. I'm just like, the most common question I get asked are you actually looking to meet people or is this for your business? And I'm
Yup.
like, yeah,
That's like one of my openers. It's like, are you real? You a real person?
are you real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns out people don't like being asked that, so you kind of have to like work around that. But yeah, I fucking hate Tinder. I wish it was better than it is. I think I've only met one person that I actually hung out with on there.
Yeah. Well, I have a almost a policy with myself that if I don't actually connect with that person in person within a couple of days,
Hmm.
then I'll just unmatch from them because I I'm busy. You know, dare
Sure.
I sound like a dick, but I'm busy. My energy is really important to me, so I'm not going to prioritize the messaging to some random for a week. Um, I ain't got time for that shit. So either
Fuck
meet
no.
me, we'll catch up, or we won't.
Goddamn right. Yeah, I remember. Actually, I think there was two people I met on Tinder that I really liked, and one of them had a very similar policy. She was
Mm.
like, "You need to get on the phone with me right now, and we need to have a good conversation, or I am not continuing this." I was like, "Okay,
Yes.
go. Let's get on the phone."
And
And
that there, clear communication. You know exactly what she wants. You can either match that, meet that, or it doesn't suit you.
yeah, and it
But
was
it's
rad. We talked on the phone for like an hour.
yes, yeah.
It was
And the
super cool.
connection may not go anywhere, but at
No, it
least
doesn't.
in that moment, it was present. You're aware, and that communication was transparent.
It's just the fact that somebody asserted boundaries in the first place was a huge turn on.
Yeah,
Which is
and
which is, I think is good to talk about. I don't think women realize how much of a turn on boundaries are.
yes, I was just going to say, and that relates to really well with sex. You know, being really clear and direct about what you want and your boundaries, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean, doing it in a way that is empowered and delicious. That is a fucking turn on.
Mm-hmm. Especially because for me, a guy with a fairly well developed dark side, I don't want to go in there dark. I don't want to just be like, because me going at 100 could potentially traumatize somebody. I need
Yeah,
to know where not to go, you know?
yeah,
And so if there's boundaries, then I can relax into the structure that you've provided. And I can
hmm
say, here's my parameters. I know how far to go. I know what buttons not to push. I know what game we're playing, and I can play this damn game. But
yeah,
if there's no boundaries asserted, then it's like, oh, geez, what do I do? Since she didn't say anything, I should really only give 10% just in case. And
yeah.
nobody really
And how
likes
fulfilling
10%.
is that for you? Yeah,
Not very at all. At all. And it's cool because even if somebody sets boundaries or things like that that aren't my preference, it's like, oh, I'd rather we were able to do stuff like that. As long as I know, I feel so much better.
yeah,
I feel so much better. And it really is weird how much I think women in particular are taught to think that their boundaries are either not welcome or that they don't matter. Uh,
Oh,
like,
there is so much generational bullshit, darling. Like as far as trauma and crap around the expression of ourselves sexually, even in life, there is a lot of shit that women carry. So it's
mhm,
understandable and completely, I would say, normal.
sure.
But creating that space to heal that bullshit is really, really fucking important to enable the fulfillment, the fullness of the experience of life, especially sex.
Yeah, because it's one of those things. Just like, hey, bro, you're allowed to like this weird thing. Just like women, I don't think a lot of women have ever had anyone like hold them close and like look at them and be like, hey, like your boundaries matter.
Mm.
I want to have sex with you, not a figmented, like made up version of what I think I want you to be, but like the actual person. Like that's where the
Yeah,
connection, that's where the good shit is. And I
yeah.
think a lot of people have never had anyone actually treat them that way. Maybe people have
And
said it,
it's
but
a
to actually
very
treat
vulnerable space as well to actually be your authentic self.
them.
You
Hmm.
know, there needs to be, or it takes a certain level of self comfort,
Hmm.
to allow yourself to be completely vulnerable, to be transparent, to communicate those boundaries and be like, it's okay. If that person says they don't like me, it's okay. You know,
Hmm.
I I have these boundaries within myself. I love myself, and I'm not going to be a complete fucking mess if someone turns me down.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Something you said just reminded me of something, but I lost it. Oh, well, it was brilliant. Trust me.
Oh, damn it.
Okay, this is great. So I want to not take too much longer because I want to make sure that people will actually watch this to the end, because I could probably talk to you forever, but that may not be interesting for everyone else. So is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Anything like that? Because this is amazing. Like I said, I could probably just keep talking to you.
That's cool. No, I'm happy with what's been covered.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank you. This feels like a slightly different flavor than our last conversation. Um, it feels more grounded and slowed down, and I like it.
Yeah, yeah. Our last convo was like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah.
crazy.
A lot's happened in 4 months.
A lot has happened.
Fucking A. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. I would love to at some point have another conversation because you're kind of my go-to person. Because like you understand the spirituality of it, you understand the sacredness of it, but you also understand the profane, and
Mm.
and you
Mm.
exactly the fact that that's the thing that made you shudder is the reason you're my go-to person, is because yeah, the sacred and all that is great, uh but I think our ratio of what we prefer more, it's like I think it matches up a little bit better, and so our interest goes to the same areas, and our understanding leads to a lot of the same conclusions. And so as far as when I want to have a conversation about sex, you're kind of my go-to person. So
Thank you.
yeah, so I'd love to do this again at some point. uh, I know we talked about, I'd mentioned potentially doing this fairly regularly. I'll have to work all that out, but anyways, I just want to thank you because this is always really enjoyable for me.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. And, you know, for those of you that are watching, and that do enjoy these and have stayed to the end, thank you for joining us. But also send in some questions to Chris, around sexuality, around sex, around intimacy, relationships, love, the profane, or maybe the spiritual side. And we can explore those as well, because it's delicious to go into and to create this container to share and to speak openly and raw. And that's one of my core things, being
Mm-hmm.
raw and real, and sharing from my experiences, um, and getting this information out in a way that connects with people. So yeah, send through questions, send through topics, and
Yeah.
I'd love to discuss more with you.
And I'm glad you said that because I wanted to make sure that, because I only got 2 questions and that seems strange considering the topic. And so I want to make everybody know that I won't, like, if you ask a question, we're not going to put you on blast. Your name will never be said. It'll be a totally private thing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming if there's someone like maybe, I guess men or women could potentially be more comfortable asking you a question rather than me. And
Mm,
I think you'd be open to having people ask you
yeah,
instead of me if that works, but I don't want to say
yeah,
that for you.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, people can find me on Instagram or Facebook, or they can email me directly. um, yeah, via my website, the Intimacy Institute New Zealand. Just jump on, connect, and yeah, and we'll create
cool. And I'll post links to all of your stuff when I actually
all
post
of
it
my
to YouTube.
stuff.
All of your stuff. I'll just get it all over the place. It'll be great. All right, my dear. Well, thank you. You're amazing. I absolutely love talking to you, and I will see you next time.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes. That's the wrong button. Fuck, I always do this.